Hello, everyone. Happy Public Schools Week. This week is Public Schools Week, so welcome to you all. I am excited to be presenting the second webinar in this series of how do we provide invigorative instruction, how do we engage, how do we advance young learners. So the topic is invigorative instruction to engage and advance young learners with severe and multiple disabilities. So again, I am most grateful to AbleNet University for offering me this opportunity to present this webinar. And I'm also thankful to each and every one of you for joining us. So the last webinar, I focused much more on the cognitive academic content. How do we promote communication? How do we promote cognitive skills? How do we get the child engaged? How do we use universal design for learning, for access, for participation, for the child to express in his or her own way what he or she has learned and to demonstrate what she knows. And then we also looked at some behavioral challenges. In this webinar today, we will focus on how do we blend within those academic content and outside the academic content also some kind of what we usually think of as fun and relaxing activities like art, music, movement, role play, games, in order to increase students' engagement, in order to increase the students' motivation so that they are far more alert and attentive, and increase their ability to listen so that their brain is growing. And at the same time, we will try to blend these activities as much as possible so that they are not standalone activities, but blended with literacy, communication, and cognitive skills. So some of the things that we will focus attention heavily on today are some personalized adaptations and tools that you can use. How do we use multisensory techniques? What do we do in order to make it student specific? And how do we, of course, blend in technology and a child-appropriate device, that, tapping into the strength of the student. That's what we will be looking at. And let me begin this presentation with a little celebration. As you see in the slide, this is an artwork by a child who has severe and multiple disabilities. And this particular teacher took an idea from my book, and I used to be a consultant for that school district at that time. And this teacher, with her creativity, she kind of unleashed her creativity and made it into a kind of a mason's masterpiece. When you look at it, it looks beautiful because of the way it is presented and because of the multiple colors that are involved. And what it is nothing but a collage. And all the student did was to drop these things or shake them from a mini snack bag, plastic bag, with an, which was kind of clipped, and then he kind of shook that and it dropped on this paper. And you can certainly use contact paper, which makes it even better. So in this particular case, she said she had written the explanation, and she had a kind of an art attractions corner in her room where she displayed student work. And the most important thing was every day when she brought the child and showed him his picture, what he had created, you could see this extraordinary smile coming from his face. And that was so fulfilling, the teacher said. But that's what we want to do, to be able to tap into the strengths that the child has instead of focusing on the fact he had severe and multiple disabilities, so he couldn't handle, pick up, grasp things, and that he didn't communicate. But he used his eye gaze, and he was able to use an adapted glove, and he was able to, with his grasp, he was able to do a few things, and that resulted in this masterpiece. And of course, she covered it with plastic wrap when it was dry, and it was displayed on the artistic attraction dedicated wall. And I'm sure many more of you are doing it, and I hope many more will do this. So we have a poll. Are you usually linking your art with some kind of a literacy activities? Let's say you read a book, and then you follow it up with not coloring a picture, but some kind of a craft art, a slightly three-dimensional type of art, or at least two-dimensional, not just coloring a page. So are you linking the art with the literacy activity so that it reinforces whatever they learned, the vocabulary associated with that book? Are you pairing math and science with, let's say, you're creating maybe some flowers, and those flowers link with counting activity? And are you usually pairing any kind of rhythm instruments with your music, or just waiting for your music therapist to come and do the music for you? I hope many of you are doing it in addition to that. And are you routinely using role play and drama, which will just blend in beautifully with literacy lessons and some math lessons too? Are you using music and movement activity? I'm not talking about hours and hours. I'm talking about 3 minutes of music and movement, 5 minutes of music and movement, kind of blended into your daily routine. And do you play games routinely? So go ahead, and the numbers are coming in. I see that a number of you use music and movement daily. That's fantastic, because music has a wonderful quality. It helps to lower the anxiety level. It helps to lower the frustration level of students, especially some of our students with significant needs and significant disabilities experience a lot of frustration and anxiety, and this helps to relieve that. And also music and movement brings some predictability. Okay, so the most, it seems to be music and movement. That's great, because it is a soothing tool. And some of you play games, and games can be used to build literacy. Games can be used to build math skills. Games can be used in a variety of ways to relax. And also, the most important thing that we want to do is, in these games, we want to make sure that we include all of the learners, including those with significant needs and severe and multiple disabilities. We'll talk about some more ways. And so one of the things that I am a strong believer in is role play and drama. How do we infuse role play and drama? It is not any famous kind of production that we are going to be doing, but it's a simple thing that blended in even during your storytelling, even during your reading lesson. How can we do that? Okay, and these are all my publications. These are all my books, and I have two recent ones. One is an early childhood transition. How do we handle that early intervention to early childhood and early childhood preschool program to kindergarten? That's a recent book that came out in December. And then I have a quick reference guide called Prevent 7 Contemplative Strategies for Addressing Behavior Issues. It's a quick reference guide that was published by another company in Austin. That came out in February. And this particular presentation is drawn from my book on severe and multiple disabilities, serving students with severe and multiple disabilities. A lot of the ideas for today's presentation came from that. And I also have a music CD that we will hear a little bit of song. And you will see the other publications on this slide. Okay. So how do we think of art and art experiences? How do we integrate that with cognitive literacy social skills, behavioral skills, and how do we blend them all together. So we use adapted tools. We use technology devices and aids, and we also use some adapted techniques. So let's say, what do I mean by an adapted technique? Let's say all of your children are sitting on mats on the floor. Is there a way you can get that child who is in a wheelchair also more or less at that same level? Can you talk to your physical therapist or occupational therapist to find a way, either they are in a kind of using a wedge or some kind of a seat that's more on level with the other students who are. That's a kind of a technique. What are some tools? A variety of tools I'm going to be showing you, like, in order to bring attention to something that you have, and the child has difficulty focusing his attention because it's kind of wandering here and there, do we use a flashlight to kind of brighten up that information, the picture, the object that you are trying to show linked to your lesson? So and then, of course, we all know there are a variety of technology aids. But one thing I do want to mention, in many of the classrooms that I walk into or I do on-site coaching and provide professional recommendations, I find we have a tendency these days to use devices that have so many icons that an adult has to kind of hold the child's hand to press on that particular icon, which becomes not a child-initiated action, but an adult-initiated action. So it is important for us to pick a device that matches the child's communication and the child's concept understanding, so that when we begin with limited icons or something like I Talk to a Communicator, where there are just 2 buttons they are pressing, then gradually increase that challenge as they gain mastery. That is when we truly engage and involve the student. So let's look at some learner characteristics, especially those who are experiencing severe and multiple disabilities. I do have to say this is a very small segment of the population, only 1% of the population, and they may exhibit not all of these characteristics, and these are not to be considered as something that is coming in the way, but these are something that is important for us to understand and then try to think of them not as barriers, but as needs, and how do we find the strengths that these children have. Many of these children may have limited speech or communication difficulties. They may respond in a variety of ways. They may cry, they may use vocalization, they may use body movements, they may use some gestures, and some may use single words. So we need to see, how do we tap into that? What do they have? And some of them may experience physical mobility problems, and they may not always be able to, but can we provide an adaptation so that we maximally use that hand, arm, for them to be fully engaged? And they may have, they may need for the adult to change the diaper or help them with their dressing and toileting. And some may kind of exhibit attention difficulty. That's one of the things that I mentioned earlier about using a flashlight to bring their attention to what we are sharing with them. And they may have high levels of distractibility. And one of the things that you may do, when you are having a group lesson, make sure that child who is very highly distractible, whose attention level is kind of limited, then there are a couple of things you can immediately do, and that is give that student something, a role to play in that story, a role to play in that lesson, so that that student is kind of likely to be much more engaged. And then in the beginning, train the student to kind of even be there instead of wandering around the classroom. You may have some students with significant needs and who is experiencing autism and who has that diagnosis, may want to just wander around the room. So is there something, a role that the student can play? And then in the beginning, they may be sitting for 5 minutes, and they may be going and taking a break for a couple of minutes and then coming back and sitting back. So these are all some adjustments we can make. And some may engage in self-stimulation, self-injurious behavior. So can we give them some kind of fidget toy so that they are using that instead of hitting themselves or hurting themselves or scratching themselves? And some may have visual and auditory problems, and of course there may be 1 or 2 students here and there that you might see who has medical issues, and they may be tube fed, and so you have to make the most of what they can do, tapping into their strengths. So this is a kind of a hierarchy that you can think in terms of how do we set up the room so that everybody is included? Do we have access to the assistive technology all of the time? Do we have that conveniently available? If we are making adaptations, are we consistently using that adapted equipment? So make sure your environment is child-friendly for that child who is experiencing severe and multiple disabilities. Are you adapting your materials? Are you making personalized adaptations? Are you using always the adapted cuff? Let's say one child who has difficulty grasping things, are you using an adapted cuff? Instead of, sometimes I see this and it pains me, and that is we prefer to feed the child rather than make sure that the child, even if it is a couple of spoons, 3 spoons, 4 spoons, they themselves dig into that food and then they try to take it to their mouth. At least partially are they participating? Are we making sure we are using all the technology? Are we adapting the activity? So some may be able to fully sit on the mat and listen and respond to questions. So, but we need to make sure a child who is not using words to communicate is making a choice or pressing a device in order to be able to respond. What unfortunately happens is we tend to have an adult always sitting next to the child, and the adult is initiating. Is there a way we can make that child be part of that response? And then one of the things that I will mention again and again, and that is we need to maximally utilize the peers. The peers are an important resource in that classroom. How do we get them? Can we have activities that combine a student who is maybe verbal, who is not experiencing any motor difficulties, to be working with another child? So at least they will have that social interaction. They will have eye-to-eye contact. They will, both of them will feel a sense of fulfillment from doing the task, and the other one from assisting and helping with the task. So what some of the adaptations is, one of the things is we want the child to be able to familiarize himself with the materials, with the touch and the look and the listening and then the smelling, so that they get used to that material. And then, as I said earlier on, we need to make sure that they are positioned appropriately. The moment somebody walks into a classroom and you have all of the children sitting on the floor, and you have this one child sitting in a wheelchair, and there is an adult sitting next to that person, then immediately the impression of anybody walking in is, this child in the wheelchair is not able to do. How do we change that? How do we get that child to be at the same level? How do we change that perception? That's something. And then you may need to consider, how do we make sure when the child is, all of the children are sitting around a table, and this child in the wheelchair is also, and there is a tray, is there a way the child can actually use that table? Can we stabilize the materials on there? Can we use, for example, consistently the Dyson mat? So that is part of the equipment that should be always available for that child when that child is doing any kind of activity at the table or on his tray. Can we place, or if the child is not able to, can we put a eye gaze board, or can we put a whiteboard where the objects are attached, and so that is at the eye level of the student. So we want to make sure we provide the tactile, visual, and the verbal supports that are student-specific, and then use assistive technology to ease the participation. And then, of course, the best experts are the OTs and the PTs of your program, and they can help you with the optimal positioning and the associated adaptive devices that you can use to maximize the child's participation. And let's say if you have a child with visual impairment, most children, even when they have visual impairment, they have some kind of residual vision. Work with your VI teacher or the consultant to see how can you maximally get that child to use his vision. And then use sound cues. And I used to consult for the Helen Keller Institute many, many years ago. And what I found was there was a fantastic, very creative art teacher. And she got these students to engage in pottery and making craft items. And she used the sound cues so beautifully that almost all of them produced a variety of things. And in the end, I will have a slide that shows some of the things that they created. Okay, and then some of the alternatives again. Consider adaptations for your art and your music or your role play activities. Can they use feet to paint? So in other words, what you do is you attach a kind of a rectangular sponge to the foot, and maybe they dip it into the paint, and then they kind of press it onto a paper or a big sheet of paper that's taped to the floor. It's kind of a little bit of fun. So some of your other students who do not have them, they may also want to do that, and it becomes like that day it's all foot painting. So you can do that. Or somebody has the same way, if their hand is outstretched, you can attach the same kind of a rectangular sponge, and they dip it into the paint, and then they make marks. And then you can combine it with, let's say, a story. Let's say the 3 little pigs, and they built a house, and they are making this house with bricks, and then you can make that the outline of that house. And then they can also wear puppets on the feet. Let's say you have a child who has kind of issues with his hands and cannot use it. Then let's say for that story, you are connecting it with a puppet for that story, and then they are the ones who are showing the puppet, and then you point to that, and then your child who is verbal can point to Brian has that puppet on his foot, or a sock puppet, or somebody else, Amber. See her? She has a puppet. So the others will also get to look at that person using this in an unusual way. And during your music and movement activities, how do you involve them? Can they shake their feet instead of hands? Can they wear bells on their wrist or on their ankles and move it? And it could be attached to an adaptive grip or adaptive cuff. Similarly, can they paint with using, as I said, with a sponge? They can use it stamps. We tend to think of art purely from the perspective of coloring a picture. We need to kind of think slightly outside of that and say, art can be painting, art can be making a collage, art can be making a puppet. So, and the puppet need not be anything complex. It can be just a brown paper bag with either Vicky stick attached to it or Chanel stems, which are the old-fashioned, what are called the pipe cleaners. How can we do that? So let's think in terms. Perform art in a variety of positions while lying down, while lying down on the side, or propped up on pillows, or sitting on a wedge. Also, we need to move away thinking in terms of one child standing in front of an easel and painting. Instead, we can cover up the entire table with paper and all of them do what is called group art. Let's say we are doing the story of the giving tree. So some students can have that, for example, a sponge, a rectangular sponge, and they can press it in brown paint if you want to make it truly a brown trunk. They can make the trunk. Another child who has a circular sponge, or children without any physical difficulties, can make the tree the top of the tree where the leaves are, green with that green paint. And then another child who has more precise ability, motor control, can use apple stem and make the apples when the green is dry. So, and then we put that, and then we get to write a little story attached to that one about the giving tree and what the tree gave and what the boy asked. So, and then of course there are other ways which most of you I'm sure know, inserting crayons and pencils and paintbrushes through styrofoam ball or tennis ball. And at the same time, while we are pursuing these art activities and role play and all that, we want to make sure that some learning objective is also inserted and infused into it. We can certainly include choice making. Do you want brown or do you want black in terms of colors? Do you want to do the leaves or do you want to do the trunk? So you are building vocabulary. You are increasing the communication. And you are also bringing about social interaction when they do group art. And then the child with severe and multiple physical needs, they get to see the other children. They hear their words. There is this joy, and in watching others, my child with, let's say, significant needs, looks at the other child, the other children in that group, and they derive a tremendous amount of joy. And when they see another child smiling at them, it makes them want to smile. And so you are increasing their attention, you are increasing their motivation, and we are slowly helping to grow the brain. And then when we have these kind of peer interactions and social togetherness, so it looks like some people are having some audio issues. I'm doing my best in terms of volume. I hope it's working.
Yeah, that's an individual issue, so it's not an issue throughout.
Okay, good. So these peer interactions and social togetherness, when they do group art, they can try to identify and label. This is a sponge, this is the tree, this is the trunk, this is the leaf, this is the apple growing on the tree. So the other children who are around can point and may almost become like peer teachers at that point. And then one of the things that happens is they're following direction, and that's particularly important for children with significant autism disorder or who are experiencing communication difficulties and behavioral difficulties. It helps them to follow a simple direction. And for them, one of the most important gifts that this group activity will give is to work with other children and experience that social interaction and build up their social skills. So, and then they are also starting and stopping the activity based on cues, so they are paying attention, they are making eye contact, and generally it increases engagement. When engagement is increased and activity level is increased, you are likely to see reduced behavior issues. So let's see what kind of adapted tools we can offer. The black cloth wrapped around the hand that you see, it's called the headliner cloth. You don't have to use that, but that's one way you can do that. You can make it even simpler and just use mittens or gloves and put it over the child's hand, and then put Velcro and attach objects. Let's say that letter A that you see, you can use it for the story, beautiful story, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. So every time you say A told B and B told C, I'll meet you at the top of the coconut tree. You can have one child with a coconut tree and made again out of just the inside of the paper towel roll. You can make a tree out of that and attach branches. And then you can have another child who's got significant physical needs to be holding different letters at different times during that lesson. And then they can have like a march at the end with two groups, one group with some letters, another group with another set of letters, and they are moving back and forth, and your child with physical needs and severe and multiple disabilities could be holding different letters at different times, and then at the same time have an assistive technology device where that particular letter or that whole thing, A told B and B told C, is played over and over again as they march. So that child has a role to play as well, instead of just watching others. And you see some stamps, and you see a butterfly stamp that you can link with the very hungry caterpillar story. And then you have these built-up pencils and stamps and all that for a child to hold, and you can insert it inside the cusp of the hand. And then you see a picture there of a large beanbag velcroed to a glove, or you can do the same thing with a mitten, and then they can use it. You can attach pictures to it, you can attach objects to it, or you can just have counting. I mean, they can drop that, they can shake it off, and then say one beanbag in the basket. Okay, and they can also, you can blend art with literacy. Here you see a book that has actual objects attached to it. And I want to emphasize at this point a very important thing. We do use very heavily, intensely, picture cues for children with significant needs. What I'm talking about, significant communication and attention issues, significant multiple and severe disabilities. One of the things we need to do for children who have significant cognitive and communication difficulties is to use as much as possible concrete adaptations, concrete representations, concrete objects so that they can feel and touch in addition to seeing the picture. So in this particular book, this was made by one of the teachers and working with the child, and this was a group of students making it with the support from a teacher, and then they made it full of concrete objects within that book so that the child has an opportunity to touch and feel that. In the other one, the My Cookie book, you can combine it with a beautiful story, Pat Hutchins' book called The Doorbell Rang, which works beautifully with counting activities. So these are all connected with literacy or math, but at the same time, it's a work of art. And you can also combine it with, you have some higher functioning students who are working on their writing activity, and you have students who have significant cognitive and communication difficulties working on putting together, touching that, and counting the cookies maybe, and the cookies can be inserted inside a mini plastic bag. So as you add, it becomes a counting book, it becomes a touch and feel book, and it links with that story of the doorbell rang. And each time the doorbell rang, there were more and more people who came in, and they had a total number of cookies, and they needed to share. So it's also about sharing. And then combining, again, math with art, and this is patterns. You can make a kind of a matching game, and the students themselves can make it, match different types of textures like bubble paper, corrugated paper, sandpaper, and they are matching textures. And the child who is struggling with the cognition and communication can actually do this pattern and then share it with his or her friend. You can also do some of the others in the classroom who are learning patterns. They can actually be making a repetitive A, B, ABC, ABC, AB patterns. And then your student with significant needs could also use a clothespin. If they have some amount of grasping ability, they can pick it up with a clothespin and then drop it, and both items have to have Velcro on the back in order to, and then you can remove the Velcro and you can change the pattern and you can use a variety of these things. These are all ideas, and I'm sure you can expand on them. And this could be a visual display. We often have numbers on the wall. We often have vocabulary word wall. Again, I want to mention that in the early childhood classroom and the elementary classrooms like kindergarten, first grade, early elementary, you want to make sure you have fewer words on your vocabulary word wall, and you master that, and then you move on to the next set of words. So instead of having 20, 25 words, begin with 4 to 6. Again, you can have a math wall, and instead of having throughout the year the same numbers, I know you do want to have numbers, but also have another math wall where you are using, like, for example, patterns. And make sure you have them as the students are lining up and walking out, have it close to that exit door from your classroom so they are likely to see it, and that's a good time. Spend a minute pointing out the pattern. So it's green star, red square, blue diamond, and then, repeat that, and then say what comes next. So each day you spend maybe a minute just as they are walking out, and that also helps to focus attention and for them to practice. And this is also becomes a beautiful art display of your students' work. And this is a collage. So you go out to recess, you go outside, and then at the end of that recess, make a 5-minute walk, and each child picks up some seeds, some naturally growing flowers, and some leaves, and they bring it back, and maybe you need to take a paper bag or some kind of a small Ziploc bag with you before you go, and then each child gets one, and they collect a few things, and they bring it back, and they create an artwork, and what it is a contact paper, and they just press these items on that, and then you display it. If you want, you can cover it up with plastic wrap, and then that becomes your art wall. And then, when they have done that, then you can read this beautiful book from National Geographic. It's called Seed to Plant. And it does go into kind of some advanced vocabulary. So your students who are high functioning, they can be challenged. And you have students who are just beginning to get the concept of what a leaf is or a seed is, that it will address through its beautiful pictures, and now they have a 3-dimensional artwork that connects with that, and it becomes a science lesson, vocabulary lesson, and they can certainly count how many leaves they got. So it becomes a math lesson as well. And this is a beautiful book called Seed to Plant from National Geographic Kids book. And then, of course, you can increase engagement with other kinds of activities. What you see on this here, where my cursor is pointing, it was done with a fly swatter. And then I will show it to you again in the next page. And here they are using pears, raisins, and cherry to make food art. And so it makes the increased interest and motivation level. And you get everybody to involve. They can pick up the raisin with a pincer grasp, with the clothespin, or they can pick it up with just a spoon. And if they have an adapted cuff, they can pick it up with a spoon and drop it on the plate. And here on the right-hand side, the feather duster art is just using feather duster. So you insert it into the child's closed fist, and then you have that kind of art created, and then connect it with the story. So this one is that, and then you can link it to the story, The Very Busy Spider. And they can put some stamps for the spider, and then you have hit it with the fly swatter to make that kind of a spider web design. And then they can make flowers, just crushing tissue paper, small squares of tissue paper, and then inserting a Chanel stem or a pipe cleaner or a wiki stick. You can attach wiki stick, and they can count the flowers inside each little plastic cup. And then there are some pictures of stamps. And then you can make puppets. And as I mentioned, one of the things, many of you said you like to use music and movement and blend that music and movement with children shaking some instrument. And your child with severe multiple disabilities, you can put a glove on, and they can shake that shake the musical toy or musical rhythm instrument, whatever you want to call it, that the students themselves have made with 2 paper cups and some beans or rice or something else, and then your child with severe and multiple disabilities can pick the color for the outside, they can pick the stamps to put on there, they can pick the stickers to put on there, and they can certainly shake it when the others are all maybe singing or listening. They can also activate a device and then sing with the others. And then you have another picture of the food art, and then this is a paper bag puppet, and they're making a feeling space. And for these kind of activities, you do want to make sure your child with significant motor needs has a partner, a peer partner, who is working with him or her so that they can create these things together as a team. Okay, so the next one is using music, and many children with anxiety disorder or stress disorder, and children with ADHD and children with autism, they experience difficulties with transitions, with their arrival, with the dismissal, when they're going out to recess, when they're coming back in, when you ask them to clean up and get lining up for recess. All these things present problems. So music therapist and I put together a music CD called Magical Musical Transition. And what they have found is music helps to bring certain amount of predictability for the routine, and also it increases focus and engagement, and it helps to lower that anxiety and frustration level for these students. So I am sharing with you a couple of songs. One of them is called the Welcome to School Today, and you will hear it in just a minute. And one of the things that you can do with this particular song, in order to make that child with significant motor or severe disabilities, or someone who has very significant cognitive and communication needs, is pair this song or just before the song. After you have a PowerPoint presentation of children's photographs that you get at the beginning of the school year, and you kind of display it, and that child who is just beginning to know his peers, and he may not be able to say their name because he has communication, but at least gets to see his own photo next to the other peers. And so when you do that on a regular basis, he or she will learn to recognize the other peers and their names. And gradually you can get him to point to his own photograph. You can get children with such severe needs to point to a peer. And, if she points to her peer, that is one more concept she has understood. And the same way, there is a song. It's called Time to Play Outside. And again, it is to bring predictability, and they all line up, but they know what to do in that. So that's what this is. It's magical musical transition. We are going to
Welcome to school today. Welcome to school today. Welcome to school today. Let's get ready to learn and play. Put your backpack away. Put your backpack away. Put your backpack away. Let's get ready to learn and play. Now shake, shake, shake a friend's hand and say hello. then go to the table.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one. This is Prep for Recess.
Use this songlet to transition children to recess or outdoor play.
Time to play outside, time to swing and slide, time to play outside. Recess time is here. Line up at the door, line up at the door. Line up, line up, line up at the door.
I hope you heard both of the songs. Those two, there are many other songs on that music CD for each transition, each change in activity, because changes, transitions, arrival, dismissals, or unexpected events cause considerable anxiety and stress for children with, as I said, autism spectrum disorders and ADHD. And also for children with severe and multiple disabilities, it will, or especially those with significant cognitive difficulties, it will also kind of connect that activity that they are going into. So we are going into recess, and that music will help them to listen much more. And the others, it will prepare them for that change in the activity. So we are moving on to act it to make drama. And there are a variety of picture books that you can use. Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, I mentioned it already. It's a fantastic book. They can learn the letters. And let's say you're doing this in kindergarten or first grade. You can also combine it with, it says A told B and B told C. In other words, you make it up in such a way, you divide your classroom into two teams, and then each team has to come up with, let's say you are thinking of all the food words. So they have to come up with only food words that begin with that particular letter. A, apple, B, banana, C, and they take turns one after another. The first child, they all have their letters in their hand, and then they have to say a word that begins with that letter connected to that theme. So in other words, the challenge level is much higher, but that is something. But they are playing it like a game. They are playing it like drama. So that adds to their motivation and attention and engagement. Another one that's beautiful, you can do this one even as you are reading the story of Are You My Mother? You can have, as you read, the bird, the little baby bird came to the hen. The little baby bird came to the... So you give just a little index card attached to a craft stick, and you just maybe write cat. And if you have a picture of a cat, just stick it on there. And different students, especially those who have difficulty sitting still, you give them those story props. And during the story, either they are lifting up their paw when you say hen or cat or cow or dog, or they make the sound of that animal at that time, which adds to the beauty of that story and increases attention and engagement. And this one, when Sophie gets really, really angry, it's one of my favorite books because it teaches emotion. It teaches calming down. It has extraordinarily beautiful pictures, and it's written by Molly Bang. And again, you can act out that story after you read that story and enjoy the pictures. Somebody can play the role, and then you can make it. And this would be perfect in a first grade classroom when they act out the story. You're not going to make a big production, but you just say, pretend to be Sophie, and what happens to Sophie? So she makes an angry face. And then pretend to be the mother, and she redirects. And pretend to be the sister, things like that. And then another beautiful, beautiful story is Caps for Sale. And for that one, you can engage all of the student. And if you're moving around and standing up, then your student who's using a wheelchair to ambulate could be the cap seller, and she could be or he could be wearing these different caps, and then she could have an assistive technology device that says caps for sale, caps for sale. So there are a variety of things you can do. You can assign different roles. You can match the role to the student's needs and strengths. You can pair it with assistive technology device. You can play music during that, and the one child can press the device to play the music, another child can press a device to hear the script from that story. So sometimes we think these are activities that require too much organization, too much planning, but actually you can make it instantaneously, make a drama, make a role play, but what it is you will reduce your time focusing on discipline and behavior because you have engaged the students, you have provided novelty, and you have increased their motivation level. Because of that, the brain is far more receptive to absorbing that information. And here, again, these are about feelings. I do believe it's extremely important in preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, to teach emotion, to be able to label emotion, to be able to express those emotions safely, and not to act out those emotions, except if you're doing a little play or playing a charades game like make a happy face or make a sad face. And this one is like combining it with an art activity. All it is using a paper bag, and they put their hand inside the paper bag, and they move the puppet, pretending to be as though it is the face. And all that requires is either they are using a wide brush to create the hair, or they may use little wiki stick for the hair and the mouth, and then they can use markers and press on the markers, or if you can get some stamps, like a circular stamps for the eyes, it's done. So you make it simple. It takes maybe 10 minutes for the activity, and at the end of it, they have all created their feelings faces. Shake and jingle with the instruments. Try to play music. Many of you indicated that you use music and movement, but combine that music and movement with their creating a little musical toy or a musical rhythm instrument, or for that student with physical needs, maybe you can put kind of a velcroed badge or band, and then attach some bells, jingles on it. And then you can combine that music and movement with teaching directions, locating and identifying body parts, opposites, and you can also pair it with a game that you're playing, like musical chairs, and again, instead of musical chairs as we typically think, we can do it as a musical pair. In other words, two children are going together and finding chairs. And how do we include the child who is using a wheelchair is making sure that we have one child who is also helping and holding that child's hand or holding that tray, and maybe an adult is moving that. So they also get included in the joy of that musical chair or musical pairs game. You can use scarf activities. As a matter of fact, Georgiana's Two Words CD has beautiful scarf games. And then you can also involve your children in clapping their hands, shaking their heads, shaking their hand, shaking their body, tapping their feet, depending on what part of the body they can use more easily. So these are all different ideas that you can pursue as part of your music and movement, combining it with a musical rhythm instrument. And so again, as we beginning to close this, I wanted to mention, do use Dyson mat to keep materials from slipping. Not all of us think in terms of that, and I do not find many teachers using that. With the result, sometimes children get frustrated because either the paper keeps moving away or the object that they are trying to hold. For a child who throws things or a child who pushes away things, is there a way you can tie it to that tray, tie it to the table using kind of a large, wide rubber band or elastic tape? Also be mindful of how a student is positioned. I mentioned it already. Be sure to stabilize their bodies. Use stamps. Use gloves, use mittens, use Velcro to attach the objects, and add textures. And maybe you can put sand or colored sand inside a plastic bag and make a snip so that they can actually pour it as they are holding it. And if they are not able to hold it, you can attach it to a glove and then they are pouring it. Use stencils, use templates, move away from just coloring pictures because that limits the possibility of everyone getting involved in that activity. Use thick sponges. One of the ideas I'm suggesting is making kind of a slit in the bottom and then sliding the child's finger so that they can use it much more easily. The couple of ideas here on this slide, one is like a beanbag toss, and in other words, they are throwing the bean bags into a basket, and of course, it is a lot easier for a child who does not have motor needs, but you can also combine it with, a mitten Velcroed with that small bean bag, and then combine it with a kind of sit in a circle, and each child is given a number, and they have to throw that many bean bags. So it becomes a math activity, but it also becomes an activity for group interaction. And you adjust that number according to the concept level, the cognitive level of the student. And next slide, I will show you what this octaband parachute activity. The octaband is a very interesting type of I could call it a tool. So children who are positioned in a wheelchair can also use it, and you can put attachments to that. And children who are visually impaired can also use it as long as there is a peer next to them supporting them. And the other activities, Simon says, the teacher showing a visual, and they do that instead of the teacher saying something, they have to look at the picture. It increases their attention. So this is the octaband, and they throw things in the middle of the octaband, and they lift it up, bring it down, they lift it up, bring it down. So you learn direction words, you learn antonyms, they shake the balls, they move it from side to side, and they can rotate and move around also. So you can do a variety of things, but it is interactive, it is movement, it's enabling, and most importantly, the classroom environment has to be joyful and have a lot of novelty so that all of the children, those with and without disabilities, and those with very severe or multiple disabilities, can also be included and engaged. And of course, it is extremely important to make sure that we use the devices that matches the student's needs. They're making a choice, then iTalk to Communicator is a great device. Or if you want to make it among 3 choices, then you want to use the Talking Brick. You want to program a script, you can have a student who is verbal program the device, and the student with severe disabilities who has communication needs activates the device. And then you can also use an environmental control unit to increase access to the activities. And I'm also showing on this page a sequential device so that you can have step-by-step sequence of directions or different things that different persons in a play say, all those things you can use. You can have your students program and say the things so that they feel kind of a sense of joy, and the other students who activate the device have access to their voice. So this is the one I was talking about. This was a team effort at the Helen Keller School. This is from many, many years ago. And the most important thing is the purpose of the art experience is not, we are not going to make artists out of our students, but to use art as a means to expand students' awareness of self, student awareness of others, and to increase and advance their engagement. And at the end of the day, we want every child with severe and multiple disabilities to walk out with desirable academic, behavioral, and social outcomes. So this is what Helen Keller said. While they were saying it cannot be done, it was done. And on this slide, I have included some art apps, and you can take a look at them. One is called the Sock Puppet Up app, Finger Paint app, and some of them may be difficult for your students with severe and multiple disabilities, but take a look at that and see which one you can use. And final points to take away. Introduce slowly students who are tactile defensive to different textures. Most important message that I want to communicate as a result of this seminar and webinar, concentrate on what your students can do. What are their strengths? Give students as many opportunities as possible, because some students do need a lot of repetition and practice and practice and practice. And making music, art, movement, and blending it with your academic areas increases engagement and attention and concept acquisition. So as I said before, use drama and role play, involve students in playing games, use that to build vocabulary, use them to build math skills, and of course, work collaboratively with your team, with your therapists, your speech therapists, your occupational therapists, physical therapists, your music therapists, so that you can design the appropriate and adaptations that are needed for individual students based on their specific needs. Think differently about disabilities. We all need to shed any preconceptions that we may have and consider unique perspectives and solutions. These are some resources. As I said, most of the material comes from my book on severe disabilities. And there are many, many resources that are available outside of that. And finally, I want to thank each and every one of you. I heard that there are a lot of people who have registered, and I'm most grateful to you. I am sure each one of you is dedicated and committed to making a difference for those students who have more significant needs. But they have many strengths. Let's tap into that. And I'm extremely thankful to AbleNet for hosting this webinar. Thank you. And there are a couple of webinars coming up. One on April 17th that focuses on STEM thinking for all young learners. And one on May 8th is personal living skills and self-dependence. How do we promote functional living skills for students with severe and multiple disabilities? That would be all ages. Thank you. Have a great day.